When I received the surveillance footage, my heart sank. There they were, standing just outside the front door, Kathy and that guy. They didn't hesitate or seem worried about being seen. Instead, they made out right there, brazenly, before walking inside together. Watching it, I felt a cold wave of disgust and betrayal wash over me. 20 years of trust, of building a life together, crumbled before my eyes in those few seconds of footage. I instructed the investigator to compile the footage into a full report and let me know once it was ready. Seeing it in this undeniable form, something I couldn't just brush off or ignore, was like having the final nail driven into the coffin of our relationship. 20 years of marriage, shattered in an instant, reduced to something so base and thoughtless. There was no coming back from this. My name is Ted, and I'm 56 years old. I run a small automobile garage. I was married to Kathy, who was 52 when we separated. Right now, I don't want my family to know what's happening in my marriage because everything feels so raw. After 20 years together, I recently discovered that Kathy has been cheating on me. The way I found out was completely by accident. Kathy, who works as a nurse practitioner, told me she was called in for an overnight shift. When I couldn't get in touch with her, I got worried and called the hospital. They casually told me she had left hours ago. That didn't make any sense to me. Why would she say she had to work when she left so much earlier? It was in that moment that I started to realize something wasn't right. I decided to drive by her work, hoping to see her car parked there, but it was nowhere in sight. That uneasy feeling in my gut started to grow. I circled around the area, driving aimlessly, trying to spot her car, but I came up empty. I called her again, but this time it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to keep my voice calm, but inside, I was starting to worry. Something didn't feel right. Kathy had never been the type to keep secrets from me, not even when we were younger, back in college. If something was wrong, I felt she would have told me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and I didn't know what to do. I just knew I had to figure out what was going on. I kept driving around, searching, but still, no sign of her car. Eventually, I went home and sat there, waiting, hoping she'd call me back and explain everything. But the longer I waited, the more that sick feeling gnawed at me, leaving me with more questions than answers. At about 7 in the morning, she finally called. Her voice was calm, and she apologized, saying she'd had a busy night at the hospital and couldn't get back to me sooner. I knew she was lying. Something in her voice, her story, none of it added up. But instead of confronting her then and there, I just said, "It's okay. We'll talk when you get home." She came home around 8 a.m., looking exhausted. She launched into this detailed story about how one of her patients needed constant care throughout the night. I stood there, pretending to listen, but I couldn't focus. The only thing running through my mind was how to figure out why she was lying to me. As she talked, I watched her closely, every gesture, every word. After a while, she went to clean up, and then she headed to bed. I had to go to work, and since I work for the city, I couldn't just take time off to track her movements. If she was cheating, I needed to know for sure. During my lunch break, I called a few private investigators. It wasn't cheap, but these guys came highly recommended. I didn't have the time to keep following her around myself, and I needed the truth, no matter what it cost. Living in Georgia, I started looking into the divorce laws, even though a part of me didn't want to face that reality. I hadn't entered this marriage with the thought of it ending, but if Kathy was cheating, I knew I couldn't stay. Fortunately, we didn't have any children. Kathy had experienced 3 miscarriages over the years, and while those losses were tough, it was something we faced together. But this betrayal wasn't something I could just move past. This wasn't the marriage I had signed up for, and she wasn't the woman I married 20 years ago. Still, before making any final decisions, I needed to know for certain if she was unfaithful. The truth had to come out. The private investigator assured me he could uncover what Kathy was doing and who she was seeing, but it wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to pull the trigger on it just yet. I told him I needed some time to think it over. Later, when I got home around 5 p.m., I found Kathy in the bedroom, talking to someone on the phone. I couldn't make out who she was talking to, but her voice sounded tense, almost upset. I didn't want to barge in, so I headed to the kitchen and started making dinner. My mind was racing with suspicion, but I tried to keep calm. A few minutes later, she came in and joined me, acting as if nothing was wrong. But I could feel the distance between us, even in the silence. She told me she'd been discussing some personal issues with her best friend. That night, she had to work, so I took the time to prepare her a plate for dinner. We chatted for a bit before she headed off. Later, around midnight, I tried reaching her at the hospital. The staff informed me she had left about 30 minutes prior, saying she wanted to grab something to eat. That struck me as odd. I'd already made her dinner. That moment planted a seed of doubt in my mind, and I realized something didn't add up. Instead of calling her cell phone to follow up, I stayed quiet. The next morning, while driving to work, I contacted the private investigator. I gave him my credit card details over the phone, deciding to take the next step to uncover the truth. I decided to meet the private investigator in person after work, bringing along some photos and any other information I thought would be helpful. Once I got there, I handed over all the details and signed the necessary paperwork, making it clear that I wanted him to begin surveillance immediately. In the first few nights, he reported that my wife's car didn't move. It was surprising, but I felt it was only a matter of time before something surfaced. Then, a few nights later, I received a call from him. He had captured video footage of my wife entering someone's house late at night. He mentioned that her behavior seemed suspicious. When she walked out to her car, she would glance around, almost as if she were checking whether anyone was watching her. What struck me as particularly strange was that she appeared to change clothes in her car, switching into workout gear. The investigator said she would drive about 10 minutes from the hospital to this house, entering like she had a key. She stayed there for 45 minutes to an hour, and when she left, no one came to the door with her. It was all very discreet, and the way she moved made it seem like she didn't want anyone to notice her. The private investigator informed me that after visiting the house, my wife would drive back to the hospital, change back into her work clothes, and return to her shift. Turns out, all of this was happening during her lunch break. Despite the suspicion, I told him I needed more definitive proof, something that left no doubt she was involved with another man in an intimate way. As awful as that request sounded, I needed concrete evidence before confronting her. The investigator reassured me that he'd continue his efforts to gather more incriminating footage. A few nights later, he called again, saying he had more to show. This time, the footage revealed my wife meeting a man at an all-night diner. According to the investigator, she walked in, kissed the guy at the table, and then sat down with him. He mentioned she must have taken an extended lunch break because she was gone for almost an hour before heading back to work. However, this time things didn't play out the way they had before. There was something more brazen about meeting him at the diner, kissing him out in the open like that. It felt like a shift, a sign that things were escalating. After they finished eating, the private investigator reported that my wife and the man got into separate cars and drove to his house. They both got out, walked up to the front door, and started making out before going inside together. After seeing this footage, I instructed the investigator to compile everything and let me know when it was ready. In the days that followed, I began putting my affairs in order, mentally preparing for what was to come. I didn't want to leave anything to chance or have loose ends that would complicate things later. I met with my attorney, explained the situation, and he immediately began assisting me in filing for divorce. He offered sound advice on how to proceed, ensuring I was ready for the next steps in the process. A few days later, the private investigator contacted me to let me know he had compiled all the video footage. I went to his office, and he showed me everything he'd gathered. Despite knowing what I was about to see, it was still surreal to watch the betrayal play out on screen. Up until that point, I hadn't confronted my wife or changed my behavior around her. We had been dealing with a dead bedroom for a while, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was the reason. When I discussed the divorce with my attorney, he brought up spousal support, which caught me off guard. I asked him why, and he pointed out the significant income disparity between us. My wife, as a nurse practitioner, earned close to $100,000 a year, while I made about $55,000. He suggested I pursue spousal support, and although I was initially skeptical, I eventually agreed to include it in the divorce proceedings. A few weeks after Kathy had been served with the divorce papers at her workplace, she called Ted immediately, her voice a mixture of shock, panic, and disbelief. "What the hell is this? Divorce papers? What's going on?" she demanded, struggling to comprehend the situation. Ted remained calm. "I think you know what's going on, Kathy." There was a long pause as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Her voice wavered, turning from confusion to cautious realization. "Wait, are you saying you had someone following me?" Ted didn't hesitate.
Yes.
Her panic turned to anger, her tone sharp as she snapped back at him. "You hired a private investigator? What the hell, Ted? How could you? That's disgusting. You went behind my back like that?" Ted, unfazed by her outburst, responded coolly. "I had to, Kathy. You weren't going to tell me the truth. I needed to know what was really going on." Fury now mixed with desperation, Kathy's voice wavered between outrage and pleading. "You invaded my privacy, Ted. You think that makes you any better than me? Spying on me like that? How long have you been watching me?" Ted's tone remained steady, though his words were firm. Long enough. Long enough to know you've been sneaking around, lying to my face. I've seen the videos. I know everything. Kathy's anger began to fade as panic took over again. Ted, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. We can work through this. We can go to counseling, fix things. You don't need to do this. There's nothing to fix, Ted said, his voice cold. You lied, Kathy. You've been cheating, and now you want to act like it didn't happen. You don't understand, Kathy pleaded, her tone softening in desperation. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I was confused. I made mistakes. But we've been through so much, Ted. We can get through this too. Ted's voice grew sharper, cutting through her excuses. What about all those nights you told me you were working late? Or the times I sat wondering why things were falling apart between us? You knew exactly what you were doing, Kathy. And you just didn't care. I never asked her why she cheated. The reason didn't matter. The dead don't question their killers about why they were killed. She had killed something inside me, my faith in her, and our marriage. There was no need for an explanation. Whatever reason she had wouldn't change the fact that she'd destroyed the trust we once had. It was over, and nothing she could say would make a difference now. I moved out and found my own apartment. The house was hers, a gift from her father before we got married, and I didn't want it. Letting go of the place felt like a relief, like shedding something that no longer belonged to me. However, when it came to the divorce hearing, I decided to pursue spousal support. Despite everything, I felt it was fair, given the financial disparity between us. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure I could move forward on stable ground, just like she would. After my ex-wife's attorney tried unsuccessfully to have the spousal support claim dismissed, the judge ruled in my favor, granting me spousal support for the next 6 years at a rate of $900 per month. I was honestly surprised to receive any support at all. Now, her deceit is going to cost her for the next 6 years, and each month will serve as a reminder of the consequences of her actions. After the divorce hearing, I felt a sense of freedom. I was finally a free man. From that point on, I never saw or heard from my ex-wife again. However, I did stay in touch with the private investigator for a while, and what he uncovered in the weeks that followed was shocking. The man my ex-wife had the affair with was a married police officer. Whenever she visited him, his wife was away on business. But when his wife eventually came home and discovered the affair, she was consumed by rage and shot him. He survived the shooting, and now his wife is awaiting trial for the incident. Since then, I've received my first alimony payment of $900. It seems this affair ended up being a costly mistake for her. I guess the old saying holds true, you have to pay to play. 6 years later, after the final payment, all the evidence of Kathy's cheating from the private investigator, videos, photos, and messages, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I gathered the contact information of her family and close friends, people she interacted with regularly. Then, I compiled everything, making sure it was clear and undeniable. I sent it all in one go, sharing the footage and messages with everyone close to her. Her betrayal wasn't just going to stay hidden between us. They all needed to know the truth about who she really was.